Queen Mary II is one of a kind. She's the only true ocean liner in service anywhere in the world today. Unlike modern cruise ships, which are designed to operate in calmer waters and warmer climates, Queen Mary II was built for a very different purpose: to cross the North Atlantic year-round in conditions that would stop most other ships in their tracks. Her hull is longer, deeper, and far stronger than standard cruise ships. Her bow is sharp, flared to cut through heavy seas. Her propulsion system, 4 powerful pods with their electric motors fed from power generated by gas turbines and diesel engines, gives her the strength and speed to complete a transatlantic crossing in just 6 days at full speed. She is fast, stable, and immensely capable. A ship designed not just for comfort, but for endurance. She can maintain service in conditions that would cause others to turn back. But Queen Mary II is not just a technical marvel. She is the living embodiment of a great maritime tradition. The continuation of a lineage that includes ships like Lusitania, Aquitania, Queen Mary, Queen Elizabeth, and of course, Queen Elizabeth II. Every element of her design pays tribute to that heritage, from the sweep of her sheer to the elegance and grandeur of her public rooms. She is unmistakably Cunard. She embodies all the knowledge and mastery Cunard has acquired since their first purpose-built ship, Britannia, set off on a maiden voyage on July the 4th, 1840. And despite being larger than any ocean liner before her, she was never designed to be the biggest. She was designed to be the best, the most capable, the most refined, the most enduring. Since her maiden voyage in 2004, she has carried over 1.5 million passengers across the Atlantic on more than 400 crossings and visited ports on just about every continent, turning heads on every occasion. She has hosted royalty, artists, scientists, and everyday travellers, all drawn to the idea that this is something different, something extraordinary. To sail on Queen Mary II is not simply to take a cruise. It is to participate in the final chapter of a story that once defined how the world travelled. And remarkably, that chapter is still being written. Welcome to Queen Mary II.
There is, unsurprisingly, a lot of Queen Mary's DNA in Queen Mary II. Obviously, they're very closely related, but if you've been on Queen Mary II before, if you go and stay on Queen Mary or vice versa, they'll feel oddly familiar. The rise of the ocean liner is really interesting because it's kind of, taking place at this time when new manufacturing techniques and things are sort of skyrocketing. First it's iron, big bridges and buildings and things like that being made out of iron, and then, hey, we can make ships out of that. And then steel is the new material that comes along, and the steam engine, of course, completely catapults this piece of technology forward. And as it's going along, the time it takes to get not just across the Atlantic, which is kind of like the high watermark for how technologically advanced your ship is, but out to Australia and places like that, it's going from months to weeks and then eventually days. And so, obviously there's going to be a lot of national pride wrapped up. And unfortunately, in the lead up to the First World War, the huge push for nations to have ships of state is kind of like directly tied to nationalism and militarism, like this massive arms race between Britain and Germany, building dreadnought battleships using technology that they were perfecting in their ocean liners, turbine engines and things like that. They did become a powerful image of your national, meaning and importance on the world stage. But beyond that, they were really, celebrities in their own right, household names. Everybody knew the names Lusitania and Mauritania and Etruria before that, and going back 50 years before the big ocean liners at the start of the 20th century. It's hard to probably understand now that, once upon a time, to get to visit family in Australia or America or India or wherever, meant weeks and weeks and weeks being tossed around on a small sailing ship. Conditions were just unthinkable. The most famous voyage out to Australia, the record-beating sailing ship, the Marco Polo, came out to Australia. She was the first ship to do it in a certain amount of months. I think it was less than 3 months or something like that. And was heralded in the press as this huge achievement for Britain and seafaring. More than 50 children died of epidemic along the way. I didn't mention that really in the papers. That was just the standard of life at sea, and that's what it meant to travel. You were really taking your life and putting it in the crew's hands, but they could only control so much as well. So a lot of ships disappeared. I think the Lock Line, 25 ships, beautiful modern metal-hulled sailing ships. Only 5 ever made it for scrapping because the rest were disappeared, ran into storms, hit icebergs, so just the whole time. So, you know, the ocean liner comes along and suddenly you have a little more control over the conditions and the weather because you don't have to worry about the rain and the wind. You can actually cut through it, and the ships are getting bigger because of their steel hulls. And so, you know, it connects the world in a way that hadn't been connected before, purely because now you could maintain a regular schedule with some confidence that you were going to arrive at the other end on time, least of all, but safe and sound. And so it is a huge, huge step forward. When you look at the way ships had operated before, where it would take sometimes weeks to get favorable winds, and ships would sit laid up in port. And if you were a traveler looking to get to the United States from Liverpool, for example, you could be a week or 2 late, and it would not be out of the ordinary. But suddenly, you know, the lack of reliance on wind, things like that, sailing ships are given way to steamships. There can be a regular schedule, which means you can arrive off Sandy Hook in New York with some certainty over what time you're actually getting there. And it becomes a real point of pride for captains to drive their ships with unbelievable force, sometimes extremely dangerously. We all think of Titanic. But even before then, long before then, captains had notoriously run their ships as hard as they could across the Atlantic. These weren't big ships by today's standards either, 20,000 tons and less. They would be really in the ocean, huge waves breaking over the bow and things like that, doing damage to the ships, but it didn't matter so long as they got into New York or Liverpool at the time that they said, because that would encourage travelers to book again, because they would know that if they had a connecting train to take them to Philadelphia, they were going to arrive in time to get that train and go where they needed to go. So we tend to think of the Edwardian age and the, you know, even the 20s and things like that as kind of being this sleepy sort of things took a lot of time. But people had come to really depend on schedules across the Atlantic that were as regular and reliable as train schedules were on land.
By the 1970s, the great ocean liners were fading fast. Air travel had changed everything. The great Atlantic crossings, once filled with ritual, tradition and glamour, were replaced by the speed and efficiency of air travel. One by one, the ocean liners were retired, scrapped, lost to history. In 1965, when I was 5 years old, I watched BBC Television's programme Blue Peter that featured a day trip across the English Channel aboard Cunard's mighty Queen Elizabeth. The report detailed the working of the ship and visited the bridge, the galleys, the magnificent public spaces. I was absolutely hooked, and I knew that when I grew up, I wanted to design a ship like the Queen Elizabeth. 7 years later, following the demise of the Queen Elizabeth, the 1972 Blue Peter Annual stated the Queen Elizabeth was the last of a great age, a superliner, and nothing like her would ever be built again. I felt enraged. I'd spent the last 2 years researching former liners and sketching out ideas for my new design, and everyone knew that I had the ambition to become a naval architect of ocean liners. Luckily, at school we were learning how to write letters, and my English teacher, Pat Bootle, said that the most important letter we could learn to write was the letter of complaint. For homework, we had to write a letter of complaint. So I wrote mine to Blue Peter, explaining what I hoped to do when I grew up and listing a few of my ideas. I sent my letter to the programme, and by return I received a blue Blue Peter badge, but disappointingly not much encouragement. Nevertheless, I made myself a promise, an ambition for the future, that one day I would design a new liner, a ship strong enough to cross the North Atlantic, elegant enough to carry Cunard's legacy, and bold enough to be called a true ocean liner. In 1969, during a family holiday to Bournemouth on England's south coast, we had the opportunity to visit the brand new Queen Elizabeth II. Proclaimed as the last great liner, she was the modern successor to the Queen Mary and Queen Elizabeth. She was entirely modern, full of chrome and plastic instead of the brass and wood panelling of the old queens. But she was very special and left a lasting impression upon me. From her decks that June day, we watched United States Lines SS United States sail into Southampton on one of her last visits, whilst the venerable Royal Mail Lines Andes prepared for her next cruise. Throughout the early 1970s, I persistently wrote to the London office of the French line for information about the SS France, and the resident director kept up my interest fueled with brochures and sailing schedules. Then in early 1974, he sent me a letter saying that if I wanted to experience France, I would have to do it that year, as she was slated for withdrawal that October. I badgered my father to take me on one of the ship's cross-channel crossings at the beginning of her transatlantic season. Luckily, he agreed, and we sailed on the 23rd of May from Le Havre to Southampton. It was my first voyage on an ocean liner, and at lunch an American lady offered to pay our fare so that we could stay on board to New York. But of course we couldn't do that. Work and school beckoned for us back home. But I was called to the first-class purser's office before disembarking in Southampton to receive a cutaway plan and a model of the ship in a display case. Every so often, I garnered further inspiration from other ships, one notable example being Holland America Line's flagship, SS Rotterdam. A true ocean liner in her own right, she was latterly operated as one of the most successful cruise ships of all time, with record repeat passengers. I particularly liked her wraparound promenade, the forward end of which was enclosed, protecting it from the wind. And for many years, my passion for a new ocean liner remained just an unfulfilled dream. The passenger ship industry had moved on. Ships were now classed as cruise ships and were getting wider, taller, slower, built for balconies and the sun, not the wild North Atlantic. But then something shifted. In 1997, James Cameron's film Titanic premiered. It became a cultural phenomenon, becoming the highest grossing movie of all time for many years that would follow. Suddenly, ocean liners were back in the public imagination. The tradition, the formality, the drama of it all. People remembered what made these ships special. And one man in particular took notice. Mickey Harrison, who at the time was chairman and CEO of Carnival Corporation. He had grown up around ships. His family had emigrated to the United States on Cunard's Mauritania, and subsequently they built the biggest empire the world has ever seen. But after watching a program claiming Queen Elizabeth II would be the last ocean liner, and noting the resurgence of interest in liners and the success of Titanic and all the nostalgia around ocean travel which would come from it, he saw an opportunity. Not for a gimmick, but for something real, a new transatlantic liner. QE2 might not be the last after all. So when Mickey approached me in the late 1990s to discuss a potential successor to QE2, it wasn't just a design brief. It was the chance to finish the promise I made as a 5-year-old boy. To bring back the ocean liner, not as a memory, but as an iconic masterpiece. The design phase wasn't a guaranteed success. It went against every trend in shipbuilding, but Mickey understood that Cunard needed something iconic, something no other line could match, and he had the vision and the conviction to bring it back. The first iteration of the design didn't pass scrutiny with regards to return on investment and required a radical rethink. I had to bring the public rooms to the lower decks and make them sufficiently high that the first passenger cabin decks were sufficiently above the waterline that I had confidence to provide them with a balcony. Never before had this been done. It was radical, but solved the revenue issue. Then I brought the Lido restaurant down from the traditional place on the top deck to the boat deck. Some thought that this was crazy, but there was a method in my madness. I wanted to ensure that in the unlikely event of the ship's company being mustered at their emergency stations, it would be done inside and not on the open deck. A cold, windy North Atlantic is not the place to muster out in the open, and so the Lido restaurant fulfills the dual role as a mustering area and a restaurant. And the ship would become Queen Mary II.
Your dream cruise, just a click away. From luxury liners to no-fly cruises, supercruises.com makes booking simple and stress-free. Book now at supercruises.com and set sail on the trip of a lifetime.
Designing an ocean liner in the 21st century was not something anyone expected to happen. It hadn't been done for decades. Cruise ships had changed everything. Wider beams, slower speeds, focused on comfort over capability. And then the Finnish naval architect Stig Osterholm designed Princess Cruises' Royal Princess of 1984, which for the first time featured a large number of balcony cabins. The cruise industry was never the same again. And yet we were about to attempt something entirely different, something no shipyard or design office had attempted in a generation. To build a vessel strong enough to handle the North Atlantic in winter, fast enough to complete a crossing in 6 days, and refined enough to carry the Cunard name and yet fully embrace the balcony era. It was a supreme challenge that had not been attempted before. That was the brief, and it was the most exciting challenge of my career. The first thing we had to do was throw away the rulebook. Cruise ships are designed around calm waters. Stability is achieved through the beam. They're very wide, and their hulls are relatively flat to maximize interior volume. But for an ocean liner, that simply doesn't work. The Atlantic is unforgiving. The ship has to be narrow enough to cut through the swells, but deep enough to maintain balance. The hull must be curved, flared at the bow, and reinforced to withstand repeated punishment. Queen Mary II was designed with a length of 1,132 feet, making her longer than the Eiffel Tower is tall, and with a draft of 10 metres, much deeper than a standard cruise ship. Her hull plating was made thicker, her superstructure strengthened, and her shape refined over countless hours of tank testing to ensure she can maintain high speeds in poor conditions without compromising stability or passenger comfort. We also had to consider power. Most modern ships rely solely on diesel engines, but for Queen Mary II, we needed a different approach. We opted for a combined diesel and gas turbine plant, or CODAG. This allowed her to use her diesel engines for general cruising and additionally engage the powerful gas turbines when higher speeds were required. Together, these engines feed electricity to embrace the hotel load of lighting, cooking, heating, air conditioning, in fact everything within the hotel side of the ship, as well as the 4 enormous propulsion pods beneath the ship, 2 fixed and 2 azimuthing, giving her both power and extraordinary manoeuvrability for a ship of her size. But it wasn't just about performance. This ship had to feel like a Cunard. I drew inspiration from Queen Mary and Queen Elizabeth, attempting to replicate the scale of the public rooms, and from QE2 with various elements such as the bridge, the mast and the funnel. French Lines Normandy provided inspiration for the breakwater and internally the divided uptakes allowing a central through passageway. Holland America's Rotterdam was the blueprint for the wraparound promenade. My intention wasn't to replicate these ships and features, but to reinterpret them. I gave her a sheer, that graceful curve from bow to stern, a funnel that echoed Cunard lineage and interiors that respected tradition while incorporating modern comfort and evoking the spirit of the great ship's estate of the 1930s. The grand lobby was designed to feel like stepping into something timeless. The Britannia restaurant with its twin staircases, domed glass ceiling with night and day lighting, an impressive Queen Mary II tapestry centrepiece was meant to evoke the golden age without ever feeling like a replica. Everything on board was purpose-built, elegant, and above all, authentic. Even our height was intentional. Queen Mary II had to be built low enough to pass under the Verrazano Narrows Bridge when entering and exiting New York, which meant carefully managing the mast height and funnel design in order to clear, with just 2 meters to spare, the bridge. I always said if the calculations were wrong, it would only be a problem the first time. And then there was the build itself. Construction began at Chantier l'Atlantique in Saint-Nazaire, France, one of the few shipyards in the world capable of such a project. She was constructed from 94 steel blocks, each prefabricated upside down and weighing up to 600 tons each, then welded together with extraordinary precision. The sheer complexity of her structure, from the strengthened hull to the immense power plant, made her one of the most technically demanding civilian ships ever built. Thousands of workers, engineers, designers, electricians, welders, painters, all working together in unison to bring this dream to life, across borders, across languages, across disciplines. And when she touched the water for the first time in March 2003, it was an emotional moment, not just for me, but for everyone who had doubted it could be done. Because by then, the world had accepted that ocean liners belonged to the past, but we had just proven otherwise. Queen Mary II wasn't a vanity project. She wasn't nostalgia in still. She was a ship designed to sail, to serve, to stand for something. She was quite literally built to do the impossible. Queen Mary II was designed from the very beginning to be a true transatlantic liner. No compromise in any respect. That means her structure, her shape, her systems, everything about her had to fulfill a specific, demanding purpose. To cross the North Atlantic at speed, in all conditions, year-round. To achieve that, her hull was engineered to a standard far beyond that of a typical passenger vessel. Her plating is thicker, her steel is stronger, her framing is more robust. The hull beneath the waterline is curved and flared, not boxy or flat, which allows her to slice through the waves rather than ride over them. The stern was specially sculptured with a reduced transom to respect the swells of the North Atlantic, where a conventional cruise ship stern would cause issues. She was built with a draft of over 10 meters. That's incredibly deep for a modern passenger ship. It lowers the center of gravity and keeps the underwater hull in the water whilst enhancing stability in rough seas and reducing roll. She's also narrow relative to her length, and a deliberate decision that improves her hydrodynamics and allows her to maintain high service speeds. When Queen Mary II was built, she had a service speed of 26.5 knots and reached 29.62 knots in her sea trials. Very few passenger ships in the world can or have done that, and this is especially impressive given her size at twice that of the great queens of the 1930s. It's not just impressive, it's practical. That speed gives her the ability to maintain schedules in challenging conditions. But her power is only part of the story, because Queen Mary II isn't just fast and strong, she's also designed around people. We worked hard to achieve a space ratio of about 57 cubic feet per passenger, far more than most modern passenger ships of similar capacity. That means she feels open, calm and expansive, giving passengers the opportunity to breathe, unwind and take in the magic of the journey. Even at full capacity, she never feels crowded. The promenade deck runs a full circuit, offering real connections to the sea. Public rooms are generous with high deckheads and excellent flow, and many of the staterooms were positioned to take full advantage of natural light and ocean views. But for me, the interiors had to do something more than just impress. They had to honour the tradition of Cunard. We weren't interested in trends. There's no neon, no theme park attractions. The goal was to create an atmosphere of timeless elegance, something that felt rooted in the best of maritime tradition, while still offering modern comfort. That's why you'll find Art Deco influences throughout the ship. In the symmetry, the lighting, the materials. It's a nod to the golden age of liners, but never a pistache. The grand lobby sets the tone, sweeping staircases, warm wood panelling, and a magnificent gold mural of Queen Mary II towering above the heart of the ship. The Queen's Room, with its columns and chandeliers, was inspired by the ballrooms of earlier Cunard ships. It's the space for dance, for ceremony, for continuity. No other cruise liner has impressive ballrooms like this anymore. And then there's the Britannia restaurant. Twin staircases lead down to a dining room that seats over 1,000 guests, but still manages to feel dignified and intimate. The mural of Queen Mary II at the centre of the dining room links past with present. Even the carpets, the chairs, the tableware, every detail was considered. This ship was never designed to be loud. She was designed to last. Because true luxury is timeless and true strength doesn't announce itself, it endures. That's what makes Queen Mary II an ocean liner, and not just in form, but in soul. She was made for the sea. The North Atlantic is not just a shipping route, it's a battleground. For centuries, it has challenged every ship that dared cross it. It's deep, dark, and unpredictable, a place of immense beauty and even greater danger. The power and might of this ocean has sunk thousands of ships throughout history, some in storms, some in winter ice, some in rogue waves, so sudden that vessels disappeared within minutes. It has no bias, no memory, no mercy. And that's what I had to design against. When Queen Mary II was commissioned, I knew she would be the last great ocean liner built, and possibly the last to sail this route with regularity. That came with an enormous responsibility. One incident I could never forget was the SS Michelangelo in 1966, a modern Italian liner, beautifully built, caught by a rogue wave in mid-Atlantic. The wave struck the forward superstructure with such force that it destroyed sections of the bridge area. Steel was torn open, windows obliterated, 3 lives were lost. Dozens were injured. She was strong, but the Atlantic proved far stronger. So when it came to designing Queen Mary II, I made sure that no part of her was based on assumption or hope. There is no public lounge perched over her bow. Instead, these spaces are reserved for structure, for strength. The most vulnerable areas of the ship are heavily reinforced and kept clear of passengers. Her bridge is placed far back from the bow, set behind layers of structural defences. Her bow isn't just flared for aesthetics, it's flared to force sea water down and away from her decks, Her forward sheer, the upward sweep of the hull, gives her lift in head seas, allowing her to rise and fall with dignity instead of being hammered into submission. Her deep draft lowers her centre of gravity, giving her more grip on the water. And perhaps most importantly, she carries immense reserves of buoyancy. That means she has far more lifting power in reserve than she'd ever need in a calm sea. Because the ship wasn't built for calm seas, we tank tested every possibility. Wave slamming, torsion loads, pressure points. We designed for the worst day imaginable. The kind of day that has taken down ships far larger than they had any right to swallow. Queen Mary II was not designed to be impressive on paper. She was designed to be safe in the real world. And real safety doesn't come from faith. It comes from skill and foresight. Because on the North Atlantic, there are no second chances.
I first joined Cunard in Barbados, and I eventually got there dragging my suitcases with me, and this officer at the gangway turned round and said to me, "Can I help you, sir?" Very polite. And I said, "I hope so." I said, "I've come to join the QE2. And he said, "Very good, sir." He said, "What will you be joining as?" And I said, "I'd be joining as second officer." And he went, "Sir." And from there on, he called help, and people came along, helped me with my suitcases, and kind of the rest was history. Initially, I have to say, I never conceived on the QE2, but I did reckon I would command ships, because that's what you do when you're training as an apprentice. You're working your way up the slippery ladder, and you hope that one day you will make it to being a captain. I met a lot of friends during my time on board the QE2, and that's one of the things, that QE2 was very much a family type ship. And it was through those there that you met people that you sailed with, you worked with, either when you swapped one ship to another ship. So that really kept me going a lot. When I first heard about the plans for the Queen Mary II, I thought, my goodness, that is going to cost an awful lot of money. And it's going to take some designing, because ships were then moving into the cruise industry rather than the transatlantic. And to go across the transatlantic, the ships have to be built tough. The hull on the Queen Mary II would have to be over an inch thick in places just to withstand the various wind forces, weather forces that you get. So I thought to myself, it's going to be quite a commitment. And when I watched and followed the progress going through the shipyard as it was building, it was amazing just to see. And the design is just absolutely spectacular. You've got that bridge front that stems from the old Queen Mary, that type of design, and that was beautiful. Just lovely. That was a work of genius, really. Initially, I always thought to myself, I'm like exposed wings. I like to feel the wind. But once I'd worked on board the enclosed bridge wings for a little time, I thought, this is the only way to go. You've got to be inside, especially when it's blowing a gale and raining. Her seakeeping ability was just about as good, I would have said, on the QE2 as on the Queen Mary II. They're both big ships. Queen Mary II probably slightly better, as it's bigger and heavier. So that she's able to ride the waves that little bit more smoothly. The power on the Queen Mary II was unbelievable. I mean, you take the QE2. QE2 is a wonderful ship for going forwards and backwards, but it was not very good at going round corners. Queen Mary II, you could take anywhere. She was just brilliant. There's no doubt about it that both ships were designed for the North Atlantic, whereas modern-day cruise ships wouldn't even think about going across the North Atlantic if there was a storm brewing. They just wouldn't do it. Rather, they would have to stop and slow down, whereas the Mary, she just could keep going. I think probably the worst conditions I ever experienced were a storm, a hurricane in the North Atlantic, and you had force 12 winds and pretty mountainous seas, really, 20-meter seas, and you would get the waves washing over the bow, smashing away at various bits and pieces. But again, the ship that was what it was built for. And so although it was very uncomfortable at times for the guests, it was still perfectly safe to travel across the Atlantic. The aspects that impressed me the most of the Queen Mary II, the height of the ceilings and the width of the corridors in some of the rooms and some of the areas, just fascinating. That they were so tall, so wide, so beautifully laid out. and it was an easy ship for me to get around. My favourite part of the Queen Mary 2 would have to be the bridge, because I'm a wee bit of a techno freak in many ways. I do like the technology, and the technology when I was there was fantastic. The radars were just superb. The equipment that you had for doing the monitoring of the safety equipment was spectacular. As are most ships nowadays, you've got so many different things that you can do from the bridge that really impressed me. When I gave the final order, finished with engines, it didn't get to me until I walked down the gangway with all my suitcases and various bits and pieces, and I was just about getting into the car to take me to the airport when they blew the whistle. And when they blew the whistle, I cried.
Why did you choose pods over conventional propulsion?
Well, we pioneered at Carnival the use of pods on 2 ships, the Elation and Paradise, and they were the last 2 of the 8 Carnival Fantasy class, and we were able with those 2 ships to replicate itineraries of both the shaft-driven ships and the podded ships, and we found there was a 9% improvement on the podded ships. So to me, with a ship such as this that was going to use so much power, the ability to save 9% was overwhelming, and that's why we decided to put pods on the ship. But then crucial as well was the propeller pressure pulses that caused the vibration. And if you were ever on QE2 when she was running at high speed, the stern would be vibrating all the time because of the propeller pulses. With this, I didn't want that to happen. And so we've spread the power over the 4 propellers, and it's completely eliminated the vibrations.
Something I find quite unusual about your ship is how the main dining room, the Britannia restaurant, isn't quite located all the way aft like you get on most cruise ships.
Yeah.
So why is it where it is?
Well, again, my principal concern was the North Atlantic route with the swells, and not only when there are swells does the bow come out the water, but so does the stern. And I didn't want to have this constant pounding underneath the stern in way of the main dining room. And a ship such as this pivots about 2/3 from the bow, 1/3 aft. So I located the main dining room more or less on that pivot point. And so even in the roughest weather with the ship pitching, you don't feel it so much in the main dining room. And that was the first public room that I put on the ship, and everything else evolved around that.
This ship had bow thruster doors when she was first built. Where did your inspiration come for those?
The bow thruster doors basically came from QE2, and it's because the ship's travelling so fast, I wanted to blank off the openings to stop the eddies. And of course that was inspired when the ship was doing 26.5 knots. Now she's running about 21, 22. It's not so important, but having the doors was inspired by QE2.
So what sort of involvement did you have with the interior design of the ship?
Well, I did the spatial arrangement, laid out all the decks and said where various things had to be, but I wasn't involved in the design per se of the interiors. Cunard engaged 2 firms of interior designers, but I did give them ideas and some direction. And in fact, the most crucial thing was where they wanted to delete pillars. And in the main lounge, there are a number of pillars that they wanted to delete, and I wouldn't let them do that, because when you think on this ship, the whole of the rest of the ship is resting on top of these public spaces. So I didn't want to do that. And then also on the Atlantic, with the ship twisting and bending, to start removing pillars could have meant that the structural integrity would have been compromised.
So we're now in the library, and this is the largest library at sea with more than 10,000 books, and I have to say some pretty good magazines in here as well. But when Queen Mary 2 was under construction, she was actually supposed to be a bit bigger than she is today.
Well, the original concept for the library was that it would expand across the whole width of the forward end of the superstructure here to incorporate a coffee shop as well, because I thought it would be very nice for passengers to be able to do that. But when the spa was being designed, Canyon Ranch, who came on to actually take charge of the spa, said they needed more space. And because of that, 1/3 of the library, the section on the port side, was allocated to the beauty salon.
Get 50% off your first order when you subscribe to Sail Away magazine. Get the digital version for £4.95 and a printed edition for £7.95 every 2 months. Subscribe today at sailawaymagazine.com.
The first time I went on Cunard was in 2004. It was a winter crossing on the QE2. So it was very bumpy, which I found very exciting. But it had always been like a dream from a kid to go on the QE2. So that was very exciting. So Queen Mary 2 went on in 2006, so not that long after it came into service. And we did one of those short nights where we went to Hamburg. And it was incredible because there's so much excitement at that time about Queen Mary 2 being so different. And I think it might have been the second time it had gone to Hamburg. But when we sailed in, there was thousands and thousands and thousands of, the banks were just completely full of people, and there's all these boats sailing around. People were so excited about Queen Mary 2 and just how important it was and significant it was. It was amazing. It was like, oh my God. And you felt like you were on something historic. So I've been on Queen Mary 2 11 times now. So quite a few times. The Queen's Grill restaurant is it's an amazing restaurant. The service is incredible. So the advantage, you have your own table. It's always open for breakfast, lunch, and for dinner. But you have 3 waiters, which you don't have, I think, on any other lines, that I can think of that I've been on. You can have caviar every night if you want, and caviar is very beautifully delivered. I think what Queen Mary 2 can teach is the power and importance of space, because obviously the size of that ship, the space per passenger, whether you're in a Britannia inside cabin or the biggest Queen's Grill cabin, the ship just has so much space. And of course nowadays modern ships are cramming more and more people in. They're closing off more parts of the ship to premium areas. So there's just that sense of space is probably the biggest thing that they can teach. But also the sense of having a real identity. That ship has it's a one of a kind. It has a layout that no other ship has. So when you walk on that ship, you feel like you're part of history. You feel like you're on something very special. If you go on any other cruise ship, you're just on another cruise ship. It lacks that kind of drama and specialness. One of the things I would have that I feel everyone should do is Queen Mary 2 Transatlantic is one of the kind of iconic, magical trips to do. And even when you arrive, people are always excited when they get on a cruise, but when you get into Southampton or you go to Brooklyn to board, there is this atmosphere from the minute you get there, this excitement about going on board. And then, one thing that Cunard do incredibly well, because they've done it for I guess, a decade now, a century now, is they know how to entertain and create a transatlantic, which is just rammed full of exciting things to do. So I would absolutely do it. It's magical.
There are so many QM2 memories that come to mind, but one of the moments that I will never forget is the ship's maiden arrival into Sydney. Now, this happened in 2007. Queen Mary 2 had been in service for a number of years, but this was her first world cruise. And no one in Australia had ever seen a ship the size of Queen Mary 2 before. She was the largest passenger ship to visit Australian waters at the time. And she arrived in the early morning of a nice summery morning, and there was hundreds of boats out to see the ship as it arrived in, and people lining the banks. But that same day, the QE2 was scheduled to come and visit Sydney as well, and pass by QM2. And whilst QM2 had been docked for the day, QE2 then sailed in that evening, and the two ships rendezvoused, the first time that 2 Cunard Queens had been together in Sydney Harbour since World War II. And tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people flocked out of the city buildings and of the subway system and the ferry system to see these ships. And it was absolutely remarkable. I'd never seen anything like it. So many people there witnessing the royal rendezvous of the 2 Cunard Queens. And it actually brought the city of Sydney to a standstill because there were so many boats in the harbour that the ferry service couldn't operate to get people home from work. Even now, after all these years, boarding Queen Mary 2 is still a memorable and remarkable moment. I mean, you board the ship into the grand lobby. It opens up to this multi-level area with the bas relief of the Queen Mary 2 on a rising sun. and you just feel like you've boarded an ocean liner. This is a ship that was designed for a purpose. And then throughout the ship, there's so much history and heritage. You can see snippets from Cunard's past, and then you can feel the hum of the engines whilst you walk through the ship and you know that she's about ready to depart and take you on a journey. It's a ship that's designed to be a ship. She feels like a ship, and she looks like a ship. And so she attracts attention wherever she goes. It's not just the size of Queen Mary II, but it's the scale, the elegance, the beauty of the design really makes her stand out. And because of this, you can't help but feel a sense of pride when you're on board. She just is this ship that makes you feel special to be there. And over the years, she has developed a personality. The crew has got used to her. There are people that come back year after year. The ship has almost like what you could describe as a ship's soul. It has a feeling on board that makes her feel like a different place to anywhere else on the world. And as a result of this, she really is a very special ship that has a very, very loyal following. I've had some really remarkable moments on board Queen Mary II, things that stand out, including lecturing on board the ship in illuminations and also in the Royal Court Theatre, transatlantic crossings, sailing through Force 12 storms, and also being on the bridge of the ship when it departed one of the ports in the world cruise right at the beginning of her service career. The ship becomes a destination unto itself. It sort of becomes alive in a way that it doesn't do, no other ship does when it's on a cruise voyage, because you have port to port and you visit different locations, whereas on Queen Mary II, the ship has to become the home away from home, and it develops this feeling, this sense of excitement, this atmosphere, and you get to know people. And during the 7-day crossing, people start to talk to each other, and you have conversations in the elevators, and you say hello on the deck, and you get to know different people's routines, and it just becomes its own place. And I think that's what really anchors this ship as a special, unique destination, is that she isn't just a cruise ship that's taking you from place to place. You don't have to worry about whether or not there's water slides on board. The ship itself has an atmosphere and a feeling. It's a little bit like a floating city at sea.
Our first sailing with Cunard was on the QE2. It was an amazing cruise out of Southampton all round the Canary Islands, Madeira in spring. The QE2, this was in the 2000s, about 2003, after she'd had her final refit, so she was looking delightfully retro and days of the Great Gatsby. Our first cruise on the Queen Mary II was in about 2006. We started off in Dubai and had an amazing cruise all the way up through to Hong Kong and ended up in Japan. I think what makes the Queen Mary II so special is the way she makes you feel. It's the moment you step on board, you feel like swooping along the carpets. You see the chandeliers up there, you see the way people are dressing, you stand more upright. It's that feeling of going back to the golden age of cruising. There's not another ship out there these days that makes you feel like that. Tell you what, it might seem like the Queen Mary II is only for the British, but I tell you what, she's most popular often with Americans because she's got that quintessential British feel. There's not many other cruise ships that have that atmosphere, that have that decoration, that have their way of doing things. So you might think the Queen Mary II is only for the British, but I think it's often for international passengers too. I think you might be surprised about who goes on the Queen Mary II. You think it's going to be somebody towards the end of their life, but increasingly I think younger passengers are enjoying the Queen Mary II because there's a drift back to the more classical looking ships. There's only so many mega ships you can go on with its theme park rides that look like a theme park. People want to feel like you're on a ship, and there's a lot of increasingly younger people coming on the ships now. I think the best part of the Queen Mary II is that she doesn't need to try and be modern. She doesn't want to try and be modern. Her biggest selling factor is that she is elegant and that she is traditional. And you've got loads of space. That passenger to space ratio is so important. It never feels full when you're on the Queen Mary II. You want to be able to go around the ship, find a comfortable spot, find a seat, find that special place no matter where you are on the ship. There are several aspects about the Queen Mary II that gets absolutely spot on. I tell you what, the cabins are really quite spacious. Nowadays, cabins are shrinking down. They're getting smaller and smaller. They still have well-proportioned cabins. And the Britannia dining room, I don't think there's another cruise line afloat which gives you that feeling of space. Waltzing down that staircase, it's a magical feeling. Looking up, it's grandeur at its best. If the Queen Mary II was to disappear tomorrow, you'd lose a meaningful part of history. It's the one ship that takes you back to that golden age of cruising. And as increasingly people want to get back to how cruising used to be, how classic ships are, and why they're better in a lot of ways, wouldn't it be ironic if the Queen Mary II, the most elegant of ships, wasn't here to see that?
It's always a bittersweet feeling. The ship has got so many fun memories wrapped up in it for so many people. I mean, myself included, traveling with family and friends and just fun times spent. It's impossible not to walk past certain spots in the deck and not think of a time that we, just sat there and watched the sunset. But to be on a ship across the Atlantic that's designed to specifically do that job with hardly a rock, you put your glass of water down, you can't even see a ripple on the surface, reminds you that you're on a pretty specialized piece of equipment doing a pretty important and special job. And you walk up to the library and pull a book out about the development of the ocean liner, and you see the old Etruria and, the Laconia and the Franconia and then the Olympic, Berengaria, all these increasingly more impressive ships. And you realize this is the culmination of a lineage of pedigree machines that took humankind hundreds of years to master. And it is almost overwhelming. And then you sit back with a gin and tonic and forget about it and relax.
Across the span of 100 years, the ocean liner stood as the pinnacle of human ambition. Machines of skill and grace, forged not just to travel, but to triumph over nature, time, and distance. They were national treasures, naval marvels, floating cities that carried millions across oceans in search of opportunity, discovery, and escape. And then, one by one, they vanished. Not in fire or tragedy, but in silence, replaced by speed, sacrificed for convenience, forgotten by a world that no longer looked to the sea. But something survived. Something crossed the threshold of a new century, against all the odds, not as a relic, not as a replica, but as a vessel worthy of the title ocean liner. Queen Mary II was never built to entertain. She was built to endure, to face the Atlantic with confidence, not caution, to hold her course when others would turn back, to carry a legacy that stretched from Mauritania to Aquitania, from Queen Mary to QE2, and sail into the 21st century. She's not like any other ship. She's not meant to be. Her bow was shaped to part oceans, not idle sunshine. Her engines were forged for speed, not leisure. Her decks are long, her hull is deep, her heartbeat steady. And in her, every world, every corridor speaks purpose, of permanence, of pride. There will never likely be another ship like her, because the world no longer demands it. But she exists. And for those of us that still believe in craft over convenience, in tradition over trend, in the power of the journey itself, she is proof we did not forget. Queen Mary II is the last ocean liner. She is the last great ocean liner, and in every way that matters, the only one of a kind. Now, I may be biased, but I think she's the greatest ship in the world.